And then, I mean, we can get into this as well. They use sunglasses, sunscreen, contact lenses. And then when you couple that with the fact that they're also exposed to artificial light, which damages the skin after sunset, you have a recipe for burns, especially for lighter skinned people.
Oh, absolutely. And I love that you brought these things up because I want to hit on each and every one of them. um, let's start with that because I've had people ask me this, and I kind of, I want to be an ideal, like give them the best advice. I wear contacts myself. What are your thoughts on first thing in the morning getting light without the contacts in and then putting them in versus, you know, getting that sun exposure with contacts in?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I am not an advocate of contacts in any scenario at all. I am more on the extreme end of that, knowing the perspective of light at the quantum level and how it impacts biology. I would much prefer to have somebody transition from contact lenses to reading glasses. I know it's not cool, it's not sexy, it's not well, it's not as convenient for people, but I think from a biological perspective, it is crucial that you get the full light spectrum into the eye from a peripheral standpoint, because that is really what stimulates the process of eye regeneration, if you want to dive into that. When it comes to contact lenses, you have corneal hypoxia, which is a huge problem. So essentially, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul for your vision. You're seeing in the short term, but in the long term, you're destroying your vision. And then, I think with all of these things, I think it comes down to the fact that any filter or lens artificially manipulates the full light spectrum in harmful ways.
Oh, I agree with you. You know, I'm probably not on the level of purist because I do wear contacts, so I can't,
Fair
go
enough.
too much. But no, but I'm a big believer that I want them out as soon as possible, and I want them left out as much as possible in the morning as well.
Yeah.
And then I'll transition for shorter periods, take them out. But I can't imagine. I mean, I've done that before where you leave them in, you just feel like your eyes are in completely not sad, not getting oxygen, not getting the light. It really does feel like that, and they start to wither away. And I do think that's a big problem as people, as you heard even in this opening, like you're staring at screens the whole time, you're not outside, you're already damaging the hell out of them.
And people, sorry to interrupt, but people don't
No,
understand
please.
in the eye, there are an incredible amount of mitochondria. There's melanin in the eye. There are non-visual photoreceptors that are responsive directly with light. So light is actually the most powerful input when it comes to all of these biological mechanisms. And if you don't respect the light in your environment and you don't allow the full light spectrum to get in, there's going to be some serious consequences down the road.
And the next part of that is sunglasses. Again, super cool, Corey Hart, wear your sunglasses at night. But there's a big problem to wearing sunglasses a lot, right? Can you go into that? Because I've touched on it and people again are just like, well, then I'd be blind from the sun. But there is an actual health risk or detrimental effect to wearing sunglasses.
Yeah. So common misconception. I hear it all the time. I have sensitive eyes. I can't go outside without the sunglasses. But when you start to view it from the perspective of it's almost like a cast for your eyes, if you never expose your eyes to natural sunlight, then you're obviously going to become more sensitive because when you're outside, the magnitude of the light is very high in general, even on a cloudy day. So not only do you have the cast perspective, you're not getting your eyes in the game, so to speak. When we're talking about the biological mechanisms behind why you don't want to wear sunglasses, it's because it leaves you more susceptible to burns, especially if you're sunbathing and using sunglasses. And the reason why is because sunlight gets into the eye, it activates, it hits the POMC gene, pro-opiomelanocortin, which I mentioned earlier, and POMC cleaves off biological peptides. There are quite a few of them, but one of them is alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. So alpha MSH. What do the melanocytes do? They stimulate melanin production in the skin as a response to sunlight. So if you block that signal to produce melanin, you're essentially leaving yourself open to getting burned. It's almost a recipe asking for burns.
Yeah, it's counterproductive to what we think, right? It's again, so many people are in this backward state, and part of that backward state brings me to my next point of sunscreen. I'm pretty sure, I would hope everyone listening to this understands that, chemically based benzene, avobenzene, All of these sunscreens are not good, especially the spray ones and using propellants, and they're really just terrible. But then you have mineral-based sunscreens. What are your thoughts on that type of sunscreen? Let's take out the carcinogenic, because we know that already, and not even keep that in discussion. What are your thoughts on mineral-based sunscreens?
If the mineral-based sunscreens are designed to block UVA and UVB, which we know have health benefits, then I think it's kind of there's an issue with the way the person is thinking about sunlight exposure, and there's an issue with their approach. Your biology, whether you're light skin, dark skin, your biology has everything set up in order for you to avoid sunburn, because that's just the evolutionary reality here. So what I want people to understand is that even with a mineral-based sunscreen, you are artificially manipulating the full light spectrum. You're blocking UVA and UVB. There is potential concern with sunscreen that it purely concentrates blue light wavelengths onto the skin, which we know is inherently damaging on its own. I mean, that's just artificial light. And then, you're preventing yourself from producing melanin, which is a huge problem, considering all the benefits that I mentioned earlier, considering that UVA and UVB are needed to produce melanin, which has all these systemic effects. I mean, you can find melanin throughout all of our bodies. Here's a fun fact for people. Without melanin, you couldn't sense anything, because between every sense organ and your brain is melanin. That's one of its properties. So I want people to understand and grasp how deep this goes from a biological perspective.
Right. And I could totally appreciate that, because again, you have to look back on where we were with our connection in nature. There was no such thing as sunscreen. You could use natural. So let's say this. What about natural things like sunflower, coconut oil, things like that have their natural SPF of 4, so I believe.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff can definitely help. I am a big believer that you should understand how to sunbathe properly and build your solar callus. And then from that point, you have to utilize things like clothing and shade. I
Yeah.
think clothing and shade are like timeless. So if you want to avoid a sunburn, you've had enough sun, go ahead, pop yourself in the shade, or just put some clothes on.
I was going to say that's the one thing people just always, do not bring up in this discussion, is it's either, well, you're going to be out in the sun for 12 hours straight. How do you do that without sunscreen? It's like, there are things like clothing and shade that we've used for centuries as well. I mean, I've been out in the desert. I've hiked through the Jordan desert before, and no, when you come upon a little tree that gives you shade, you're going to sit there for a while and just take it in, and it's beautiful. It just cools you down. Shade is a wonderful, wonderful thing when you talk about these things of being out in the sun and kind of being able to limit yourself in some ways. But people always seem to think that it's not part of the equation when you talk about the sun. It's
Yeah,
a
and you
shame,
get
I
a
think.
benefit by being in the shade as well. I mean, you get an incredible amount of near infrared light. If you can see the tree above me,
Yeah.
that green is reflective for a lot of the red light spectrum. So that near infrared light gets into your system, and it produces a whole host of beneficial processes.